All right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Serious Angler podcast powered by our friends over at X2 Power Batteries. As always, I'm your host, Bailey Egbert, and I am back from Louisiana. I was in Louisiana all last week, and I am solo hosting tonight because unfortunately the captain, Mr. Andy Full, is not feeling too well tonight. So he's taking the night off, especially because he covered for me all last week, and he held down the fort. So he earned himself a night off, especially because if he was on tonight, he'd be muted the whole night because that man is coughing up a storm. So if you guys are talking with Andy, I know Andy's super social. You guys talk to him all the time over social media. Shoot him a message, tell him you hope he feels better, and hopefully he'll be back here real soon. But we have a really cool show tonight. We're getting on Mr. Mark Menendez to talk about the TVA. You know, what's the status on Kentucky Lake? Some of the fisheries on the Tennessee River that are doing well, some of them that may be on the downfall, why they might be on the downfall, and really kind of dive into the biology of all the things, because we know he has a history in that. He has the repertoire to speak on such a subject. So it's going to be pretty cool to pick his brain on it, and obviously just talk bass fishing, because there's a lot to be learned from our guest tonight. But before I bring him on, a couple things for you guys. Obviously, being that last week was the Hobie Tournament of Champions that I fished. Did not have the finish that I'd like, but it was a pretty humbling experience making that top 50 national championship. The videos from that are going to come out. So Chasing Hardware, that series that I do on my personal YouTube channel, is down below in the description if you guys want to go check that out. I'm going to try to drop episode 1 from last week tomorrow night, so be on the lookout for that. But coming up this weekend, something really cool for you guys. You guys know we like to get in on charity tournaments that go on. Our buddy, Mr. Jackson Orr, who's been on the show before, he's got a big stake in the kayak side of things. He's running a charity tournament this weekend. It's $20. You could, whether you want to compete or not, if you just feel like donating to a good cause, feel free to enter. The link for Jackson's tournament is down below. It's a 3-day thing. It's online on Tourney X. So I'm going to hop in it. I'm going to try to fish it like it's a live event to have some fun. And the top 6 people, actually, the top 6 out of however many people signed up, the money is spread in percentages, and based on your placement, that percentage of money that you would win in that place is going to charity of your choosing. So if you get first, you get to choose what charity it goes to, all the way down to 6th place. So something that's really cool for a great cause. Jackson's doing an awesome job over there, and highly encourage you to, if you're not locked up yet, you know, your season's not already over like some of our friends in the Midwest, to fish that. And if you are locked up and you just want to do it for a good cause, feel free to click the link down below and just donate $20 to an awesome charity. So that is down below. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions on that. But I think without further ado, that is all I have in store for our notes for you folks. Let's bring on our guest for tonight, Mr. Mark Menendez. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Bailey. How are you?
I'm doing good. It feels nice to have the season over with. I'm sure, I mean, you know full well, like when you get that last term out of the way, it's like, you know, you don't get the rest for too long, because I'm sure you guys get fired up with business side of things, getting ready for the next season, but you kind of get to take a little bit of a breath. You know, you get to relax maybe for a day or two.
Well, you can't really tell. You see my face is really red, but I didn't get a very good tan because I was in Jamaica all of last week with my wife celebrating our first anniversary and just cooling out and spending a little time together. So, yeah, it's really nice to turn it off sometimes, to just get away from everything that's going on in your lives, whether it's fishing, business, kids, whatever it is. It was good to do that. You know, sometimes health becomes an issue, but I'd like to take just a second and wish my best wishes to my good friend, former Bassmaster Elite Pro, Randy Yarnell, who's going to have a very serious surgery tomorrow. I want to wish Randy all the health and good safety that he can have tomorrow. It's a big day for him tomorrow. Got to be good friends fishing with Randy on the top 150s years ago. Super good guy, helps all the Wounded Warrior tournaments up there in the Northeast. Just a fantastic human being and a good friend and fisherman, and I just want to wish him well for tomorrow.
Yeah, hopefully that goes well, and keep us updated on how that turns out. That's never an easy thing, especially when you know it's coming. It's kind of more daunting when you don't know it's coming, like going into a surgery. So hopefully that goes well for him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Mark, I'm excited to talk with you tonight because the TVA is one where, I talk to my friends down south and they're like, oh man, every time we go down, for tournaments, they're like, oh, it's going to be tough because, we go to Chickamauga every now and then for like the Hobie Trail. And they're like, oh, this place has 1,400 boats on it every single day. But for us New York folk, it's cool because we go down and like, say like at Lake Chickamauga, it's so diverse in terms of how you can catch them, especially throughout the year. So every time I've gone down there, I've caught fish doing something completely different than the last time I've been there. I love the place. But I've always heard of these different lakes in the TVA, Kentucky Lake that so well, that I've heard just legends of. And who better than to get you on here to talk about it, especially because you have a history in, was it fisheries biology? Is that correct?
Fisheries biology degree, yes.
So I'd love to dive into that in a second. But what we do with everyone that's brand new to the show, their first episode with us, is we like to throw it back to the beginning. And that is, how did you get your start bass fishing in the first place? Like, when did you catch your first bass? Who got you into bass fishing in the first place? Like, where did everything start for you?
Well, it all started. My mother says she has pictures of me at 18 months old in a diaper fishing in a minnow bucket for 2 minutes with a stick and a string. So it kind of starts way back then, moves a little bit further forward. And I've always fished with my grandfather or whatever. We always fished. And we moved out of the county into town when I was about 8 years old. And this was in the 70s. And when bass clubs were heavily prevalent across the United States, bass fishing, tournament fishing was just young. It was getting a foothold in the country. And my next door neighbor was a big bass clubber. His name was Clyde Watts. And Clyde was a telephone executive back then. And he had a big, giant inboard, outboard bass boat. How many of those have you seen in your lifetime, Bailey? I didn't see many of them even then. But he had 2 sons that were athletes. And they really didn't have time to fish. So every time he would park that big blue bass boat in his garage, I'd come over and see what kind of baits were laying in the floor. And that's a bomber, and that's a Rapala, and that's a whopper stopper, and, a bushwhacker spinnerbait and things like that. And I finally wore him down and he took me fishing. And at about 5 o'clock on that day, he said, well, Mark, it's time to go. Ms. Watts will have dinner on the table. And I said, oh no, Mr. Watts. This is a 10-year-old kid. Says, oh no, Mr. Watts, we can't go. It's not dark yet. Well, Bailey, that sealed the deal with Clyde. And I fished with Clyde from the time I was 10 to about 14, 2 times a weekend, most of the time, from the 1st of February through Christmas every year until it got too cold and muddy here to fish, and developed a strong friendship and mentorship with him. He has now passed away and gone on to the big fishing hole in the sky. And so another neighbor in the backyard, who the dad of my best friend was the tournament stick in the area back in the 70s. His name was David Hutchison. He won every tournament, Bailey. He won them all in the spring and in the summer. So he taught me the aspects of a lot of tournament fishing from the time I was 14 till the time I was about 18 or 20. And we fished a lot of tournaments together. His son, David Jr., and I are business partners and still best friends. We fish together quite a bit still. So we spent a lot of time together traveling around to regional tournaments and fishing on Kentucky and Barkley Lakes then. And then it just went wild. If I'd had college fishing, I'd still be a second semester sophomore back when I was in college. I'd still be trying to figure a way to fish. So it's really neat to see what's happened to fishing. And that's kind of been my path to the Bassmaster Elites. Started fishing bass, the invitationals in fall of 91, was lucky enough to make it to the top 100s spring of 92. And I've been there ever since. So I've had a long career, in my opinion, I've been very successful at it, winning events, making classics, setting records, all those crazy things that you never thought about when all you really wanted to do was just get there. And so I've been very fortunate for a very long time, trying to give back to the fisheries and trying to give back to the ecology and the environment these days to make it good for my kids and for your kids as it was when I started.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit. Is how did you get your background in fisheries biology?
Well, I wanted to go straight to fishing the pros, but my parents would not allow me to do that. So you got to have a plan, son. And So I got my degree in fisheries biology and probably fished too much during my undergrad years and started a master's in education. And spring of 91 in April, it was time to go sign up for Bassmaster events down in Montgomery. And I told my mom, I said, I'll see you. I'll be back tomorrow. I'm going to Montgomery, Alabama, and I'm going to go sign up for the Bassmaster invitationals. And I drove down, signed up, started fishing that fall. And like I said, been lucky enough to be there ever since. So the biology degree ended up being a secondary, a plan B kind of thing if fishing didn't work out. And fortunately, it gave me a good foundation to understand what was going in the system, in the environment, the chemistry, the biology, the limnology of things. And so that has helped in certain places and certain aspects.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to just understanding fish behavior, I feel like that definitely has to help, right? I mean, you definitely probably learned some things throughout the education that has helped you clue in on some fish behavior stuff.
Well, there has, and some of it was chemistry. I sitting in chemistry class one day, and we were talking about free radicals or whatever we were talking about, and it hit me. Hydrogen peroxide is H3O, or excuse me, H2O2, H2O2, and if I put that in water, one of those free oxygen radicals is going to break off, so it become more stable and become a water molecule and an extra oxygen. Well, if you pour that in your live well at limited quantities, you can keep bass alive. How many times have you caught a big smallmouth, Bailey? Of course, the smallmouth always bite on the end of the Olympic cast. You sling it way out there. As soon as it hits the bottom or it's on its way down, you hook one. They jump 17 times like cheerleaders. They pull like a freight train going the other way. And when you get them in a boat, you put them in a live well, they're laying over there on their side going, hey, I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a cup full of hydrogen peroxide about that big, put it right in your water. That breaks apart. The oxygen molecules break off. There's more free radicals of oxygen in the water. Within 30 seconds, that smallmouth catches his breath. He's going to bite your finger. You're not going to change the pH of the water. You're not going to hurt anything. It's an inert substance, and it throws off extra oxygen. So I started doing that a long time ago. I saved many a TVA river bass out there on those ledges, catching them on big crankbaits like that in hot water by keeping a pint of peroxide in the boat with me at all times. That was my biggest thing that I learned in college, Bailey. I promise you, that was one of the biggest things I ever used.
It's taken me till just now to learn that that's actually a thing. Why aren't people talking about that?
Well, I don't know. You can have negative effects if you put too much in there, or you're using a too strong, but a 1% is never going to hurt. I have found some other things to keep my fish alive that are better, even better. The VT2 vent, which is a vent that allows that live well to breathe. The thing that hurts our fish in their live well is when we shut them up in there in that airtight live well are the natural metabolic gases that the fish produce. PP, fish PP. It's got ammonia and urea in it. By having this VT2 vent in your top of your live well, you're pushing air in that live well down into the live well, creating a turbulence, and it goes out the back of the vent. So what it's doing is it is dropping the temperature in your live well 3 to 5 degrees, even on the hottest of days. Cooler water holds more oxygen. So if you cool that water from 90 to 87, 87 to 84, 80 to 79, whatever it is, it holds more oxygen. Secondary to that, it's letting all that bad stuff percolate out, which is good. It's like being in a smoke-filled room. When you go into a restaurant or a bar and it's full of smoke, same deal. I'm headed out the door. I'm getting out of there. Fish don't like it either. And then the third thing it does is it's actually by the vortex that is created where it comes in the front and goes out the backs, it's driving dissolved oxygen into the water. So if you have a problem with your live well pumps that day, while you're actually running from spot to spot, you're putting more oxygen in the water. So you can conceivably make a full day without having your live well pumps on. That device, the VT2 vent, has been the number one thing that I hardly ever use any other substances. I will use a little G juice sometimes when I get in, um, on the coast and I'm in tidal waters. The G juice is real good. And then if I've got a wound, a fish that's bleeding, I'll put a little G juice on it, or I'll put a little Mountain Dew or some kind of a soda pop on there, so that the carbonic acid, if I've got a hook that's making the fish bleed, the carbonic acid in the soft drink nullifies that, coagulates that blood, and that fish will live. So those are the three things that I do: a little bit of peroxide, a little bit of Coca-Cola, or the VT2 vents, and I save a lot of fish. Makes me a lot of extra money with no dead fish penalties.
Wow. So I've always heard about this Mountain Dew argument, and that's the reason why. That's like the legitimate reason as to why that works, is because of
the carbonic acid. The carbonic acid that's in the soft drink. It can be sparkling water as long as it's carbonated. It can be Coca-Cola. It can be Mountain Dew. It can be Dr. Pepper. It can be Sprite. Any soft drink that you like. I don't drink soft drinks. I haven't had one in probably 10 years. But there's always 3 or 4 in my boat just for that reason. And when that carbonic acid hits that fish's blood, it absolutely coagulates it and stops the bleeding 8 out of 10 times. So it's one more tool that I'll use to keep that bass alive, keep the resource going, and get him into the tournament people, let them take care of him, and then he can be released alive and live a happy life after that. Little things like that are kind of some of the cool things that I've learned over the years.
That is super cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So talking about Kentucky Lake, you actually just mentioned you had a great day today. That was
sure
at Kentucky?
Yeah, was filming my TV show, Mark Menendez Bass TV. You can look at it on YouTube once they air on my local television station. It's been really tough here. It's been really difficult to get shows done. I mean, catching 4, 5, 6 bass a day, I'm thrilled to catch it. But today, in about 3.5 hours, I had 10 keepers, had a fish well in the 4.5 pound class, multiple 3-pounders, and they're beautiful, Bailey. They're big and fat. They got those big black spots on them. They're all tattooed up now because the cold water makes that kind of come out. It's just a big freckle on them. And they were biting a Series 3, a Strike King Series 3, and a 3XD in chartreuse shad, and they were choking it today. So it was really neat to get a good show in, and just to see the health and welfare after the long drought of how the quality of fishing on Kentucky Lake has gone down over the years. To get a good day in, it's always a plus.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about Kentucky Lake here and the whole TVA as a system here in a second. But one thing that just piqued my interest that I have to ask the angler in me is screaming is, you mentioned a Series 3 and a 3XD.
Yes.
When do you throw those two, and like what factors determine for you to throw one over the other?
Well, the Series 3 is probably one of the most weedless diving crankbaits there is, because that bill is exactly the shape of my thumb, and it doesn't dig into rocks or cover real bad. It deflects off of it. And a crankbait is all about deflection, making that bait deflect. Even today, in that cold water today, really not cold, it's cooler. We're down to 56-degree water here. It's been in the 60s for months here. And we're just now starting to get cold. You've got to make that deflection. And most of those good fish I caught today were when either one of those crankbaits hit a rock and scooted off to one side or the other. Every bite I had today was on a deflection. So the 3 is my workhorse. I could sink my Skeeter bass boat with what I've caught on a Series 3 over the years. But today I tried something a little bit different. I haven't thrown that 3XD all that much, just because I haven't had what I thought were the right conditions. And we are experiencing quite a few zebra mussels in Kentucky Lake right now, and uptick in those. Our water's pretty clean. I can see 3.5 or 4 feet down. Seeing a lot of activity on the corners of the points, along the riprap walls, along the sides of the points in 8 to 10. And so the Series 3 itself will only dive about 7 feet on 10-pound line. But the 3XD, my active target was showing me getting it down to 11, making long casts with 10 and getting it down to that 8 to 11. So I'm keeping it on the bottom, making it deflect in that 8 to 10. And that was the big key today. right where the point broke off and started to flatten out right there was where those fish were located. That little bit cleaner water, I learned that I've not been fishing deep enough all fall. I've had a really hard fall trying to struggle and get these shows done. Got one more to get. Now I know I need to throw that bait that's diving a little bit deeper just because of water clarity. Beautiful conditions today, overcast, 10 to 15 mile an hour winds out of the northwest, and they were chasing bait really well today.
That's super intriguing. I think that's one of the things as anglers we kind of overlook is like just that small differences, and that a crankbait is not a crankbait, if that makes sense. So it's people think, oh, just because it reaches this depth, I'll throw whatever as long as it hits that depth, where that might not exactly be the case.
Well, the Series 3 has always been so good because the watercolor has always been a little bit, more turbid here. As we get some rains, those fish it's going to get a little more dingy. The fish are going to slide up on those little shallow places, those walls, those corners, those points, and then that Series 3 will come back. But until we get that water clarity, you can bet you one thing, I'm going to be throwing the 3XD a heck of a lot more than I have been.
It makes me want to go buy some Series 3s now because I've never thrown them. It makes me want to go test those babies out now.
Well, I don't want everybody just to go out and run out and get them a bunch of them. But, when I started working with Strike King 20 some years ago, we were basically a spinnerbait and a jig company. And we came out with a line of crankbaits, the Series 1, the Series 3, the Series 4, the Series 5, and the Series 6. And they were basic crankbaits. The best crankbait we make today, we're still making, was in that first bunch, is a Series 5. That's one of the best fish catching baits of all times, that one bait. Now, the other baits are great, but this one really stood out. And then the XD series came out, getting baits down in that 18 to 20 foot depth with a 6XD or now the 5XD, the 10XD. We started going into deeper areas, but this regular Series 5 is ask some of my Strike King teammates what the best crankbait we make is, and I bet you most of them will tell you that it's a Series 5. And it's a 25-year-old bait.
I'm going to have to put that to the test. I'm going to have to shoot Mark Rose and Kevin and all them a text and be like, all right, let's see. What's your favorite Strike King crankbait?
I know what Kevin will say. I know exactly what Kevin will say. Kevin will say the best crankbait we ever made was Series 5. And, you can have some translucent colors up there where you live. A green gizzard is a bad boy up there. And you can take that Series 5 over some of those shallower shoals that you all have there on Lake Erie or Lake Ontario and crank it over the top of those. And things get real interesting real fast. I won't say any more. Just have super sharp hooks is all I can
say. Yeah, and be ready to keep replacing those super sharp hooks because you're going to.
That's true. That's true.
That's awesome. Well, so let's kind of talk about Kentucky Lake. What is the current? You mentioned it's 4 to 6 fish can be a decent day out there as of right now, but what's the current status of Kentucky and where do you see it going as we move forward?
Well, I'm very optimistic, Bailey. I tell you, I'm really optimistic. Let me back up a little and tell a little of the history of what has gone on.
Okay.
We had an Elite Series on Kentucky Lake in 2018. It took over 90 pounds to win. I finished in the top 12 of that event. And I think I caught about 60 pounds in the first 3 days of the tournament. That was a false event. That was the lake was telling us a lie. Those were the last of the big adult class fish that we had, last of the ledge fish, last of the bush fish that were left in the lake. And our lake was on the downhill slide, going down the roller coaster because of the invasion of invasive species, Asian carp. There are 4 different kinds. Right. There are the silvers that are the jumpers, the big heads, which are the big eaters that get over 100 pounds. You have grass carp. Then you have one that's not getting much publicity called a black carp. And it disturbs the bottom content looking for mollusks and snails, anything it can find. And it just absolutely rips the bottom substrate up. So that's the one I'm the most concerned with. So as those numbers climbed, there's a situation called the carrying capacity. Each body of water, whether it's a golf course pond, the lake in your neighborhood, or the Great Lakes, X is the carrying capacity. That's the maximum number of fish that it can hold. That can be all bass, that can be all carp, that can be all salmon, that can be all trout, that can be all walleye, but that's all it's going to hold. So Mother Nature finds a balance there so that everybody can thrive and live. And the carp come in and spawn and grow so quickly that they push your native species out. And the first things that you see take a hit are your largemouth bass and your crappie, because what they eat gets pushed completely out of the system. Your threadfin and your gizzard shad, those numbers go to bare bone low minimums. So then you see the domino effect of these minnow eating fish, white bass, rockfish, crappie, and bass. They just take off and they head to the bottom. The numbers do. So that's what happened in 19. There were no more adult bass, hardly at all, left in the lake. So 19 and 20 got really tough. And then I started seeing lots of small fish. And we're in a great place right now. We have scads of 13 to 16-inch bass in the lake. And what's been really remarkable are our smallmouth. I don't have creel data for this, Bailey, but just from what I'm seeing being caught, I'm seeing that our smallmouth population now supersedes the amount of largemouth. So our black bass population, I would say our smallmouth population is 55 to 60% now, which that's not a bad thing. Seeing a lot of 3.5 to 5 pound smallmouth being caught. It's hard to catch a 5 pound largemouth, but it's not too hard to catch a 2.5 to 3 pounder right now. So we're really seeing some cool things. 2 weeks ago, before I went to Jamaica for my vacation, I filmed a show with the bait man, Kevin Baxter, who works as a cameraman and producer for me. And we had a beautiful day, just like today. It was low overcast, warmer, air temperature was in the 60s, water temperature was in the 60s. I think I'm getting ready to stomp the smallmouth, a new one, with a spinnerbait, and it never happened, Bailey. It never happened. I didn't get a bite till 11:30. And that's only because I went to an area on the reservoir where a bridge crosses, and it created a pinch point. A lot of water behind the bridge, a lot of water in front of the bridge. As the water was falling, those fish were being pulled to the bridge. And when I get there, I start seeing threadfin shad. And I hadn't seen schools like this. I'm looking at an acre or 2 acres of threadfin shad. So I fire a Strike King 1.5 up there. And, I'm cranking it back down the riprap in that bridge culvert. And I felt a fish get behind it, and he came off. I'm like, well, doggone. Fire right back in there. I crank it and catch one. Well, it's about a 2 pound white bass. And I'm like, well, how about that? I hadn't seen one of those in a while. Next cast, another 2 pounder. Next cast, another 2 pounder. Well, the fourth cast, it felt like somebody slapped the end of that rod with a baseball bat, and I'm hooked up with about a 9.5 or a 10 pound striper, and it pulls me down the way. Unhook it, I troll back up there, and I'm back in them again. I catch about 15 white bass. I catch another 5 pound hybrid, or not hybrid, but a striper. And then once I cleared all those fish out of there, I start catching largemouth and smallmouth in the same place. So the moral of that story is those bait fish are coming back. We have something that the fish can feed on now. The gizzard shad population is coming back as well. And I haven't seen a rockfish in the lake in years. I haven't seen that many good white bass in years. So we're seeing a good turn in the basis for the food chain, being the threadfin and the gizzard shad. The game fish species, the black bass and the true bass, are coming back. Crappie fishing is off the chain here right now. It's as good as it's been in a long time. Catching a lot of 1.5 to 1.75 crappie. One of my best buddies lives down at Parish Landing. He's begging me to come down there to crappie fish because he's catching some many. So we're doing well. Now, one of the things I got involved with, Bailey, was Right Waters, and that's through Yamaha. That's right. Yamaha's conservancy group. And I've been to Capitol Hill. I've been in front of about 60% of our lawmakers in the House and the Senate. And I went up there looking for money about 4 years ago to help fund our fish and wildlife. And through the multiple channels and through some bills that were written, we got about $65 million for Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. And most of that money stayed home in Kentucky and Tennessee on the Cumberland and the Tennessee river chains. Most of that money went for getting educated for our fish and wildlife people, getting them new equipment, doing studies, and working with the commercial fishermen and starting a carp industry here in our area. We eliminated a lot of these carp because fortunately, Bailey, Tennessee, TWRA, Tennessee Wildlife has not found any young of the year carp in their sampling for the last couple of years, which is a great thing. These carp don't spawn like our fish do, like our bass and our bluegill and our crappie. They spawn in the spring on a full moon, 2 or 3 times during the year. These fish spawn when conditions are right. And evidently the conditions have not been really good for those fish to spawn. So we're seeing less of them. Our commercial fishermen, man, they are our only bullet that we have, Bailey, and they are doing a great job removing millions and millions of pounds of these things, opening up that carrying capacity for our game fish to get back into their normal levels. So that's why I'm so excited about things. But with the help of Yamaha and the Right Waters program, we've helped lots of things. The snapper fishing issue that we had down in the Gulf Coast, where the snapper fishery was shut down, where you and I couldn't even take our families out to go catch any because it had been shut down through the regulations. That was one of the things we've done. We've partnered with Ducks and Wildlife to do coastal restoration with Yamaha Right Waters, and then the Asian carp and the invasive species has been another big thing that we've tackled. So it's really cool to work for a company that has great equipment, boats, motors, jet skis, all those kind of things that are really giving back to the environment right now and working hard to make things better. So I'm very pleased to report that we're continuing this. I've signed up for another year of working for Right Waters next season. So I'll be back up on the hill rattling these lawmakers' chains to really pay attention to what happened, because it devastated our economy here on Kentucky and Barkley Lakes. Nobody was coming down. Businesses closed, motels, tackle shops,
Wow.
you name it, gas stations. I mean, look like a ghost town here, but we're doing well again as our lake has come back, and so is our tourism.
So do you think it's going to eventually be the former Kentucky it was, or just be a new Kentucky lake where the fishing is completely different?
Well, I got so spoiled living here, Bailey. I could pull up on a corner of a ledge out there in the middle of the lake and catch 100 every day of the year, and then go to the next corner and catch 25, and go to the next corner and catch 50, and go to the next place and catch 50. And I've gotten very spoiled here. So what I think is going to happen, the behavior of these fish have changed. They don't like being around these carp, so they don't get out there in the open water. These carp are filter feeders for the most part, and they take the best current breaks out there on the river channel. The same places that I used to catch bass on a shell bed or a stump bed or whatever, these carp have taken over because that's where the current brings the food to them. All they do is sit there and eat and get big. Well, that's what my bass used to do, and now they don't go out there like they did. So it's changed the way I've had to fish in Kentucky Lake, and it's taken me some time because I don't get to fish here near as much as I used to, because I'm always around the world fishing somewhere else. I have to go to some place called the St. Lawrence River in the summertime, and that's a terrible place to have to go. And
No fish there.
Okeechobee and Florida in the spring, so I don't get to fish here near as much as I do. But I'm having to relearn technique. I'm having to relearn location. So it's been good for me because it's made me pattern fish instead of whole fish like we all do when we're on our home waters.
It's super intriguing to me. And while I hate to see what's happened to Kentucky with the whole carp deal, I think the part of the angler in me thinks it's pretty unique to see how anglers and the fish and the fishery itself adjusts through, like, because Mother Nature is so intriguing, and it's kind of seeing how where you think it might be the end, and there's definitely a decline, but it's super interesting to see the adjustments that are made
Yeah,
from each different group that's involved, whether the
it's
angler,
it's making a U-turn, and
yeah,
that's the one hope that I have, because I really don't have a lot of ammunition to deal with these carp. Is I'm hoping that Mother Nature will throw an audible, and some kind of a bacteria or weather condition or water condition will have an adverse effect on these fish, and it will put these fish in a small niche and control them. Are we going to be rid of them? I don't know. I don't think so. I'm less hopeful about that. I'm more about management of them now than eradication. So we're working on some things now. You know, the fisheries folks here in Kentucky are really studying these fish, trying to figure out every little intricacy about them. TWRA, we're working with other agencies up the Mississippi River, STEM in Missouri and Illinois, and we're all working at this very hard. And there are a lot of very concerned people, a lot of really smart brains working on this problem. And will we find an answer? Will we find a solution? I don't know, but I think we're going to find a way to manage them quicker than we will anything else.
I've heard rumor of folks figuring out a recipe for these things that actually taste good.
Oh, they're good. They're good. See, they're not like a regular carp. You know, the regular carp, the golden carp that we've seen in our reservoirs, they're invasive species too. They were introduced here eons ago. They're actually from Europe. So, and those fish may or may not taste very well unless you do several things. And Asian carp is actually a delightful tasting fish. It's a very light flavored fish. It's not fishy tasting at all. I've had fillets. I've had them baked. I've had them with caper sauce on them. I've had them deep fried like we fry crappie and bluegill and walleye. I've had them in fish balls. There's a definite market for this. And here in a couple of our local restaurants here in Paducah, they call them Kentucky Lake Grouper. You may see, if you see the term silverfin, silverfin at your grocery in the fish department, that's an Asian carp. And don't be afraid to eat it. It is a filter feeder. It eats nothing off the bottom. It eats nothing that's dead. It's eating the plankton in the water, and that's what they eat. So it's a really delightful fish to eat.
I think that honestly, that might have worked to one thing in our favor from Asian carp is that the fact that you can eat them and that they actually taste good. Because if they didn't, that would really suck. Because all that like fish you're eradicating going to waste. Where now you can put it to use. Like
Exactly, you can put them to use, and they can be utilized as a great fertilizer. They can be liquefied and chopped up, and now it's smelly as all get out, but it can be used as fertilizer. It can be used as pet food. And one of the interesting markets that's developed are the state of Maine. The lobster fishermen up in the Northeast really like to use Asian carp for their lobster bait.
Interesting.
And so we're shipping a lot of those up there as lobster bait. So if you can skin a cat a different way, we're doing it with these Asian carp and making money at it too.
I want to know who's the first guy that's like, yeah, send those up here. I want to try it for my lobster bait. I want to know who's the first one that who tried that.
I don't care. I just wish more of those guys would order a lot more of them. So, but we're finding ways to deal with it. And, you know, like I said, I think eradication may be out of the picture here, and management. You know, Bassmaster Elite Series went to Pickwick this year.
Right.
Brandon Lester won the event with about 90 pounds for 4 days. And fishing was tough. And I'm seeing the same fish that I saw in Kentucky Lake 10 years ago when the carp population was really burgeoning and the fish health and welfare was going downhill. They were very thin, very frail, hard to find bait fish. I'm seeing the very same thing. I made the statement at Pickwick on the stage to get ready. You all are getting ready to have this a real crash in the fish population here. And from what I'm hearing of tournaments that have been there this fall, the Bassmaster Federation was there this last week. Several guys zeroed. The tournament was won with just a little over 43 pounds, which is less than a 3-pound average for 5 fish a day. Second was 37 and third was 33. And after that, it was pretty slim pickings. You know, 1 or 2 or 3 fish a day is what the guys caught, which is typical here in the fall. Fall fishing on the Tennessee River has always been tough, but it's never been this tough. Yeah. And I think you're going to see a decline about every 10 years with each lake moving further and further upstream. You know, we had an event on the classic waters this year at Loudon and Tellico in Knoxville. I saw Asian carp up there. That's the head of the Tennessee River. I saw them 2 years ago up there. So, and in the classic in 2020, I saw them in Guntersville. Made comment on stage. Lee Livesey snagged an 85-pound big head carp in practice up there. I saw silver carp in the lake. So they're from one end to the other. If it touches the Mississippi River, it's all up and down everything in the Mississippi, the Missouri. That whole stem of the middle of the country is absolutely full of Asian carp, and we've just got to find ways to get them out of there as fast as we can.
Yeah, I think that tournament last week on Pickwick, I was staying with my buddy Nolan Miner, and we were talking about we were looking at the results from day one. I think it was like 4 pounds was 10th on day one. There, it was
Yeah.
something ridiculous.
Yes.
It's we were talking offline briefly about while some lakes might rise with this and get over this hump of this Asian carp coming in, but some are going to see a decline. And right now, like what you mentioned is Pickwick is seeing a decline. You know, from this subject, seeing what happened to Kentucky Lake and what you're referring to is that the further these fish go upstream, is basically these lakes are going to see the same thing that happened to Kentucky Lake happen to those bodies of water. Correct?
That's kind of what I'm predicting. That's what I'm seeing. If the conditions are, align themselves and those numbers proliferate like they did on Kentucky Lake, you know, we've had these in the system since the 70s. They got loose in the 70s from aquaculture ponds in Arkansas and Louisiana years ago, and it was the 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, the multiplication, and then once they got into that wonderful environment of the Tennessee River, it just completely exploded. The population went crazy. So as we see that move up, one of the epicenters was the Illinois River off the Mississippi River, and that's where I fished my first Bassmaster event in fall of '91.
Mm-hmm.
And the Illinois River, at one point, there was only one in every 10 fish that was even a native game fish for a while. We're seeing those numbers come down, and the populations in the Illinois River are on the rise for game fish too. So evidently there's a bust and boom period, and then everything tapers back down to where the native game species have a foothold and have a chance. So hopefully it will get better. Hopefully it will get better.
Do you think so? I mean, I feel like you're spot on. I mean, I can't speak for it being that. I mean, I live up in the north. I can't speak being on the lake daily, and I'm sure local guides and the fishing game could speak way better to what the day to day looks like on these different fisheries. But say this is the case, right, where each lake is going to receive that same treatment as these Asian carp get further and further upstream. Do you think that our process of eradicating or fixing this issue as it comes to each lake is going to get better or more efficient as it goes upstream?
Well, I'm hoping so. From what we're learning down here, we put in a bioacoustic fish fence, a bath on below Barkley Dam, to monitor what can go across that fish fence. And that fish fence is a line of bubbles, sound, and lights. And we're doing studies right now to see what moves upstream, what moves downstream. And we've tagged Asian carp and native species to see if they penetrate that or whatever. If it were just to slow down the incoming carp by 60%, think of the millions of fish. 6 million fish a year were being put into Kentucky Lake just through the lock alone. Just mathematics, just through the lock alone. Every time the gate opened at the bottom end of Kentucky Lake, closed the gate, the lock went up, the boats went through, they opened the other side. They were putting another 6,000 to 10,000 fish in there every lock cycle. So the bioacoustic fish fence is designed so that it would keep those fish below. And the bioacoustic fish fence, the BAF, has been very significant in keeping different kinds of invasives out of the way in other places, in other situations. So we've got one in place and working below the dam on Barkley right now. We'll need two here on Kentucky Lake as we're getting closer and closer to finishing up a secondary navigation lock on Kentucky Lake. But we'll need to have two on those two locks as well. So we get those in there, that'll slow down the actual incorporation of the fish into the lakes and let our commercial fishermen go to work on them. We can slow them down significantly if we can just stop the entrance to the lakes.
That whole bath deal of the bubbles with the sounds and the lights is super impressive to me. I don't know why.
It's really cool. It's a great
system.
Awesome. It's a non-invasive system. We're not putting any electricity in the water. We're not putting any chemicals in the water. But by sound, light, and bubbles, we're putting a fence up so that those fish don't penetrate. Pretty cool. Pretty cool.
So with this trickling effect of what these fish do to these fisheries. Do you foresee? I mean, obviously, you're seeing a change in Kentucky in terms of how these fish adapt and how fishermen have to adapt. Do you see? I mean, I don't know timeline wise, but let's say 20, 30 years that the TVA might fish completely different than what we know of it now.
Oh, since the invasion, the lake has fished totally different than I ever remember it fishing. Fishes more like it did in the 70s when we really didn't fish offshore structure out behind us. We fished the bank, and the carp, you know, grass carp aren't that big a deal to a bass, but these silvers and these big heads, really, it's just as if I drive my truck through the room right there where you're at, through your living room. About 2 trips through there, you're going to get the hell out of the way. And these fish are big, they're noisy underwater. And a 3-pound bass sees a 25-pound Goliath coming at him, he's gonna haul butt, he's going to go hide. So it's made our lakes turn more into a shallow water fishery than it ever has. I'm trying to remember if I even caught a keeper largemouth offshore on Kentucky Lake this year. And I cannot come off my head saying that I caught some out there cranking a big plug. I caught some on some points that were attached to the bank on a big plug, but I didn't catch any out there where I used to catch them. Bait man films me and I said, man, I caught 35 pounds here one time, caught 100 on this one time, won this tournament here, did well this tournament there. And those are just fond memories as I see them now. But new techniques are showing up here. Very seldom did you ever see an angler fishing with a spinning rod on Kentucky Lake. Well, I mean, you can catch a lot of bass now on a Ned rig as you can up there in your part of the world. A drop shot has become a good player. A baby Z2 on a drop shot is about as deadly up there as it is down here now. So you're seeing fish getting back in the bushes good, for longer periods of time. Any heavy shallow water cover that I could find, I know I'm going to catch some fish around now.
That's super intriguing. I think that's going to be the most interesting part of this swing is seeing how these fisheries adapt and how they change. But with that, one question I have is obviously with these fisheries being able to lock down essentially to the different bodies of water in general, how do they all affect each other from just like a system?
Well, every Tennessee River lake has its own personality. And starting at Loudon and Tellico at the upper end, there's a lot of vertical cover in the lake, a lot of verticality in the lake, a lot of rock changes in the lake. Then you get to Watts Bar, and there's some grass there. Then you get to Chickamauga. I thought it was really interesting that you made a statement. You thought that's the most diverse lake that you fished, and I think it's one of the least diverse lakes on the Tennessee River chain. You've got offshore structure, you've got grass, and you don't have a lot in between. Where you move on downstream to Guntersville, you've got a lot of grass in between the bank and the river channel where most of the population of the fish live. Moving on down the river chain, to Wheeler. I think Wheeler is one of the most underrated lakes. We've got grass back in it right now, and they're catching huge numbers of 5 to 7 pound fish in Wheelers right now. Then you get to my favorite little lake, Wilson. It's deep, rocky, it's clear. It's when I won my first Bassmaster Elite Series event years ago on a jerkbait. Big smallmouth in there. And then you get to Pickwick, that's a river run lake. And then it leads to Kentucky Lake, which is one of the biggest man-made lakes in the United States that that's a lowland reservoir. So I think they all have their own personalities. I think there's some generalized traits that remain the same because it's the same river, but they all fish differently, which is one of the neatest things. And the only lake that I've not spent much time on is the lake right there in Chattanooga, below Chick. The name escapes me right now. Nickajack. Thank you. Nickajack, for years on the Tennessee River TVA creel surveys, that was the easiest place on the whole river to catch a 3-pound bass, the least amount of time to catch a 3-pound bass. And it's always been that way. Except in the 80s when we had the classic there. Charlie Reed won that classic with a very low fish count as far as weight. I think he had 14 fish that he won with, and most of them didn't weigh 1.5 pounds. Now it's not that way now. It's got grass in it. And anytime you have aquatic grasses in the lake, it provides more area and your carrying capacity goes up.
Right.
So we've been low on grass in the Tennessee River here the last 3 or 4 years due to high water flow and high turbidity. And hopefully we'll see some of those grasses come back. And eelgrass is making a real comeback in Guntersville, and now it's in Wheeler, and it's in the lower end of Kentucky Lake as well. So it's not an invasive species. It's a native species. So it's not really on the target hit list for our to kill all those invasive species. So it's a native species.
That is super. That's awesome to know, though. Like that, the fact that that's coming back.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it changes the way Guntersville is fishing now. It's a complete carpet out to 15 feet of water. So Guntersville fishes a whole lot different than it did 10 years ago.
That, I mean, one, that's just great news, but two, if you haven't spent much time on Nickajack, I have been on it a few times with my buddy, Mr. Caleb Bell, who lives up there right in Chattanooga, and that place is awesome.
It's got a lot of fish in it. It's got smallmouth in it. It's got great big spotted bass in it. It's a bucket list of mine. It's not far from me, but I don't have any tournaments on that body of water because it's a relatively small lake. So that's why it's just eluded me. But I'll make my way there soon enough.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Well, that's awesome. I feel like I could go on for hours talking about the TVA with you because it's a system of fishery that I think is probably the most intriguing out of the country. We have different chains of lakes in Florida and how those different lakes interact with each other. But I think out of our whole country, the TVA is the most interesting because one, obviously being, man-made and being able to fluctuate and being all of them kind of being very unique in their own way. I'm just so intrigued by it, especially from New York, dealing with only glacial lakes.
Sure.
We don't get too much that's different. So it's super intriguing to go down there. So I could talk about this for hours, but I just want to say thank you first for taking the time out tonight to come on here and talk with us, drop some knowledge on us. One thing, I like our first question we asked you. We always ask our guests a final question their first time on the show. And that question is, if you could sit down and have a steak and a beer with 3 different individuals.
Oh, wow.
They don't have to be fishing. They can be alive now or 1,000 years ago. It doesn't matter. Anybody in the world. What 3 individuals would you invite to have steak and a beer and pick their brain?
Well, that's interesting. I always love to have a beer with Rick Clunn. I love to really my fishing hero, without a doubt. Probably responsible for how more fishermen fish, in finding fish and breaking a lake down, just to his theories and what he's taught all of us. I love Rick's sense of humor. His wife Melissa is just a wonderful human being. I love her too. So Rick and Melissa would be the first pair there that I would love to have dinner with again. As far as other anglers, obviously my mentors, I would love to have them back. That's really cool. I'm sitting here thinking one that I would really like, that I always admired, and because I bought his book, Those Brown Bass, I would like to sit down with Billy Westmoreland. And I dedicated a lot of my youth to learning how to use a spinning rod because of a book of his. It was another book that he was kind of reciting some of the tournament stories and how he took a spinning rod and light line to largemouth country and forged a strong fishing career, making classics and winning events. And, obviously a legend on Dale Hollow, catching those giant smallmouth. I'd like to spend a little time with Billy Westmoreland. And a third person that I would love to spend time with, someone who I have fished against for eons. I have not fished against him in a very long time, but I'm proud to say that Larry Nixon is coming back to the Bassmaster Elite Series. I will buy him that steak and buy him that beer We ran the same boat for years, spent a lot of time together. It's going to be great to see Larry back out there on the Bassmaster Elite Series with us. He's a great fisherman, a super competitor. And Larry is basically responsible in my mind for a technique that became very famous here on Kentucky Lake, and that's stroking a jig. Larry was the basis of that. He taught some local friends of mine that technique. Bill and Billy Schrader, just humongous winners here on Kentucky Lake. And then they taught us all how to stroke a jig out here on the ledges. So I'd like to learn where Larry came up with that technique and spend some more time. I'm just glad I'm going to be able to spend some more time with him. So those would be the three interesting ones I'd like to have a beer and a steak with.
Heck yeah. I think the whole fishing world is excited to watch Larry come back.
I mean, he's the $1 million man. First guy to ever win $1 million. He's the same guy that he was when he started bass fishing. Very humble, very charismatic, an unbelievable speaker. If you've never got to hear him do a seminar, his seminars just full of knowledge, and he wants to teach people to be better fishermen. That's why he guided years ago, and he taught hundreds of people how to be better bass fishermen. And then when he got in the tournament game, he taught the rest of us that he could certainly catch them as well, and he can still do it even today.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to watch it. And Mark, for real, thank you so much for taking time out tonight. We look forward to hopefully getting you back on here soon to drop some more knowledge on us. And enjoy your off season coming up, because it sounds like it's almost halfway through November. You're going in a couple months.
It's go time here. I've got my new boat here. I'm waiting on some new parts to get in from TH Marine so I can rig it. I've got to get a depth finder or two together, and I'll be ready to go get my batteries in and things like that. But I've got to take the wrap off of this one, get it cleaned up. It's headed to very close to Elmira, New York. A good friend of mine, Greg Johnson, that runs a lot of the AVA tournaments up there on the Finger Lakes. This is the second skeeter he's bought from me, so it'll be headed up that way. And then I'll re-rig another one and get started again for next year. Headed to the 33rd year that I've been doing this, and just very fortunate to get to do it all this time.
Heck yeah. Well, we're looking forward to watching you and rooting you on. And again, thank you a ton for getting on here. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk to you soon.
Well, thank you for having me, and call me anytime. I love to spread the word about this invasive problem that we have in the United States. If you want to learn more about it, go to the Yamaha website, go to the Right Waters portion there and see what we're doing. We are bound and determined to fight these invasive species as best we can. And we're going to continue to do that. But anytime you want to talk, I'm here to do it. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate y'all very much.
Awesome. I'm going to go find those links that you just mentioned. And for folks that are interested in reading about it, I'm going to drop them in the show notes on MP3 and the YouTube side. So if you guys are intrigued, I will drop that in the show description, as well as Mark's social media and his YouTube will be there as well. So you guys can go check out the shows he was referring to earlier on in the show. Well, Mark, thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good night.
All right. Take care. That was awesome. You guys want to talk about knowledge getting dropped. There really isn't a much better person in the fishing industry to be talking with than Mr. Mark Menendez, in terms of, from a learning standpoint, having that biology background, and also being on the front lines of being on the water every single day and being able to report back and combine those worlds. It's pretty dang cool. And it's pretty dang cool to talk to him. And I hope we can get him back on here soon. We have a bunch of awesome guests lined up moving here forward. I do encourage you guys, as Mark mentioned, that links that he has, but also his social, everything down below. I encourage you guys to follow along, read up on some of this stuff, because conservation is, I can tell you right now, working in the industry, conservation is on the forefront of every brand, every organization, and a lot of anglers' minds. And it's very important for you guys to be doing your part in your region, and make sure you guys are being attentive. Even the small things. If everyone's doing the small things day by day, it can add up over time. It can really benefit the fisheries that we have. Some of the fisheries have been around for a long time. Some of the new fisheries that are coming about. You see some new lakes being built and grown in Texas. You're seeing some stuff like that happen. So it's super cool. And if you guys do have specific topics that you don't think are being talked about enough, from a conservation standpoint or fisheries, reach out to us. We'd love to research it for one, and then two, get on the right people to talk about the subject to try and help spread the word. So slide in the DMs or shoot us an email, and I would love to have that conversation. So let us know. But some guests moving up forward for this show. Coming up on Friday, Mr. Taylor Watkins, who won the last NPFL event down in Florida, is going to come on the show here. He's going to come on for Friday's episode. And next Tuesday, we're actually doing a dual stream. So everybody seemed to like the Halloween episode we did. We're actually going to dual stream with Kevin Baxter, who's Mark's camera guy, and do a little Thanksgiving themed show next week. So that'll be next Tuesday Night Live. It'll be streamed on our show, our YouTube channel, but also Kevin Baxter, the Baitman, his YouTube channel. So you guys can see it over there, whichever one you'd like to watch. And then next Friday, after Thanksgiving, will be Cody Milton, who was one Angler of the Year for the Hobie BOS Tournament of Champions. And then we're going to try to get the winner on. We're going to talk about that because he smoked us. Again, if you guys want to see how the Tournament of Champions went for me, that top 50 championship last week down in Louisiana on Cattle Lake, I'm going to be dropping those videos here soon. Episode 1, I'm trying to get out for tomorrow night. I'm almost done editing it, so you guys can check that out below. YouTube channel is linked below. But I believe that is it for tonight, guys. I appreciate everybody tuning in. It's good to be back. Don't have any travel planned until probably February, which is nice. I might travel for Christmas, but that's it. The shows will still go on for that. It should be Andy and I firing on all cylinders for the next couple months here to get some more consistency back in this show. We do have a bunch of stuff coming for next year. We are this close with getting apparel for you guys, and not just like your basic apparel. We're going to have some pretty cool stuff coming too. So be on the lookout for that. You guys will be able to order your Serious Angler or Business from the Bass Boat apparel or Lure Lab apparel. We're going to have that site up and running here shortly. So we're excited for that. Some other changes coming next year, which we'll announce in probably the next few weeks. Changes that are for the better. So hope you guys enjoyed tonight's episode. As always, appreciate you guys, and we'll see you on Friday.